When a surgeon's career is sabotaged, only an artist's eye can reveal the truth. The evening air over Boston carried the faint scent of rain and the distant hum of traffic as Elias stepped out of his car and onto the wide marble steps of the Caldwell Art Pavilion. The building glowed from inside like a lantern, its tall glass facade reflecting the river lights and the restless movement of the city beyond. Elias adjusted the cuff of his dark suit with the same careful precision he used before entering an operating room. Events like this were not his natural environment. He understood arteries better than champagne conversations, heart valves better than polite laughter. Yet tonight the hospital administration expected him here. The annual charity partnership between the hospital foundation and local artists had become something of a tradition, and Elias had recently become one of the institution's rising stars. Inside, the gallery vibrated with quiet sophistication. Paintings stretched across pristine white walls, each illuminated by carefully angled lights that made the colors glow as if alive. The room smelled faintly of varnish, wine, and expensive perfume. People moved slowly between the canvases, speaking in low, thoughtful tones. Elias took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray, but barely drank it. His eyes drifted from one painting to another with a curiosity he rarely allowed himself during the relentless rhythm of hospital life. One painting stopped him. It hung slightly apart from the others on a central wall, a large canvas dominated by deep shades of crimson and midnight blue. At first the composition looked chaotic, almost violent. But the longer Elias studied it, the more structure revealed itself beneath the color. Lines curved inward like vessels spiraling toward a center. Thin white strokes cut through the darkness like sudden flashes of light beneath skin. The entire painting seemed to pulse with hidden rhythm. Elias leaned closer, narrowing his eyes. It reminded him of something he had seen countless times beneath surgical lights. Not literally, not anatomically exact, but the movement, the tension of the shapes, the subtle symmetry hidden inside the chaos. A heart, not the simple cartoon symbol people drew on greeting cards. A living heart. The strange, fragile architecture of muscle and flow. You're looking at it like you're trying to diagnose it. The voice came from his left, warm but amused. Elias turned. A woman stood beside him holding a glass of red wine. She wore a dark green dress that fell softly to her knees, the fabric catching the gallery light in quiet folds. Her dark hair was pulled loosely behind her neck, a few strands escaping and framing her face. There was something calm in the way she stood, something grounded, as if the crowded room simply existed around her rather than pressing against her. Elias blinked once, surprised to have been caught staring so intensely. "I didn't realize I was that obvious," he said. She smiled faintly. "You leaned in closer 3 times. Most people just nod thoughtfully and move on." He looked back at the painting. "It's structured. That's a strange compliment for abstract art." "I'm a surgeon," Elias replied. "Structure is usually the difference between life and death." Her eyebrows lifted slightly with interest. "Cardiac," he nodded. "Cardiothoracic surgery. Boston Central Hospital. That explains the stare." She tilted her head toward the painting. "You see something medical in it." "Not exactly medical," Elias said slowly. "But the flow reminds me of vascular systems. The way the lines curve toward the center. Almost like blood being pulled through chambers." For a moment, she simply watched him, studying his face the same way he had studied the canvas. "Most people say it looks like a storm," she said. "I don't see chaos," Elias replied. "I see pressure building toward equilibrium." Her smile widened, and this time there was unmistakable warmth in it. "I'm glad someone noticed." Elias frowned slightly. "Noticed what?" "That it's not chaos." She lifted her glass slightly toward the painting. "Every line leads somewhere. Every layer hides another layer beneath it." Realization flickered across Elias's expression. "You painted this." She nodded once. "Maya Rivera." Elias glanced back at the small metal plaque beside the canvas. He had been so absorbed that he hadn't even read it. The name matched. "I'm Elias Ward," he said after a moment. "Dr. Ward." "Just Elias is fine." Maya studied the painting again, though Elias suspected she was actually watching his reaction through the reflection in the glass surface protecting the canvas. "You're the first person tonight who didn't immediately ask what it represents," she said. "That question bothers you. It usually means they want a simple answer. And there isn't one." "No," Maya said softly. There usually isn't. For a few seconds they stood in silence, both looking at the canvas. The crowd around them drifted and shifted, voices blending into a low murmur. Somewhere across the room, someone laughed too loudly before quickly lowering their voice again. Elias spoke without turning. How long did it take? 3 months. For one painting? 3 months of painting, Maya corrected gently. And about 5 years of learning how not to ruin it. Elias chuckled quietly at that. That sounds familiar. Medicine. Surgery, he said. 14 years of training so that one mistake doesn't destroy someone's life. Maya looked at him more carefully now. There was exhaustion behind his calm expression, the kind that didn't come from lack of sleep, but from constant pressure. You must carry a lot of responsibility, she said. It becomes normal after a while. That sounds like something people say when it never actually becomes normal. Elias met her eyes then. For a brief moment the noise of the gallery seemed to fade. There was a strange clarity in her gaze, direct but not intrusive. You notice details, he said. So do you, Maya replied. She gestured slightly toward the painting. Most people see color. You saw movement. And you saw a surgeon pretending not to analyze brushstrokes. They both laughed quietly. Across the room, a representative from the hospital foundation began tapping a glass with a spoon, signaling the beginning of the evening's formal speeches. The room gradually settled as people turned toward the small stage area near the center of the gallery. Elias sighed softly. Duty calls. Hospital politics. Something like that. Maya took a small sip of her wine. Well, Dr. Elias, who sees hearts in paintings. Thank you for actually looking. It deserved attention, he said simply. As he stepped away toward the gathering crowd, Elias felt something unusual settle quietly in the back of his mind. Not excitement exactly. Not even curiosity in the usual sense. Recognition. The same quiet certainty he sometimes felt in the operating room when everything suddenly aligned. When structure emerged from complexity and the solution revealed itself through careful observation. Across the gallery, Maya watched him disappear into the crowd of donors, doctors, and patrons. For reasons she couldn't quite explain, she felt as though something had just shifted. Not dramatically, just enough to change the direction of the evening. The speeches lasted longer than Elias expected. A representative from the hospital foundation spoke about partnerships, community engagement, and the importance of art in healing environments. Donors nodded politely, glasses of champagne raised at the right moments. Elias stood among the physicians near the back of the room, half listening, half observing the crowd. His mind kept drifting toward the painting he had just left behind. More precisely, toward the woman who had painted it. He tried to focus on the speech again. Something about expanding the hospital's philanthropic initiatives. Yet his attention betrayed him once more, and his eyes wandered across the gallery until they found her again. Maya stood near another wall speaking with a small group of visitors. Her hands moved lightly as she explained something about one of the paintings. There was a calm confidence in the way she spoke, but also a kind of quiet humility. She did not dominate the conversation. She guided it. Elias noticed how people leaned in slightly when she talked, as if the way she described color and movement made them see the artwork differently. A brief ripple of applause broke his thoughts. The speech had ended. The crowd slowly dissolved back into smaller conversations. Elias hesitated for only a second before walking back across the gallery. Maya noticed him before he reached her. Her eyes brightened slightly, and she excused herself from the couple she had been speaking with. I was beginning to think the hospital had claimed you permanently, she said when he approached. Almost, Elias replied. Fortunately, speeches eventually end. She smiled. And now the doctor returns to diagnose more paintings. I was actually hoping for a guided consultation, he said. Maya raised an eyebrow. You want the artist's interpretation? Not exactly, Elias said. I'm curious how you see it while you're creating it. What you look for. What tells you it's working? She studied him for a moment, as if deciding whether the question was genuine. Apparently she decided it was. Come on, she said, turning slightly. There's another one I want to show you. They walked toward a quieter corner of the gallery where a series of smaller canvases hung in a narrow row. Unlike the large dramatic piece in the center, these works were more restrained. Thin lines of pale color layered over soft, gray backgrounds. This series is called intervals, Maya explained. They're about pauses, the moments between things. Elias leaned closer to the nearest canvas. fine lines intersected like delicate pathways. Some ended abruptly. Others faded into the background. "What kind of pauses?" he asked. "The kind that decide everything," she said. "The moment before someone speaks. The second before a storm breaks. The breath between heartbeats." Elias glanced at her. "You really like that metaphor," he said. Maya laughed quietly. "It keeps appearing around you, doesn't it? Hard to avoid when you spend most of your life inside operating rooms." "Is it as intense as people imagine?" she asked. Elias considered the question. "Sometimes more." He gestured lightly toward the painting. "When a patient's heart stops during surgery, there's a moment before the machines react. Just a fraction of time where everything becomes extremely clear. Every movement matters. Every decision carries weight." Maya listened carefully, her expression thoughtful. "And you're the one making those decisions," she said. "Usually with a team," Elias replied. "But yes, ultimately the responsibility lands on the surgeon. That must be terrifying." "It was," he said simply. "At first. And now? Now it feels like solving a puzzle under pressure." Maya shook her head softly. "Only a surgeon would describe saving a life as a puzzle. And only an artist would describe a painting as controlled chaos," Elias replied. Their eyes met again, and for a moment the conversation paused naturally, the way conversations sometimes do when two people begin realizing they enjoy speaking with each other. "So," Maya said after a second, "what brought you here tonight besides hospital duty?" "That's actually the only reason," Elias admitted. "The Foundation likes to display successful doctors at events like this. You're the exhibit? Something like that." "Well," she said, lifting her glass slightly toward him, "I'm glad they sent you." Before Elias could respond, a young assistant approached Maya, holding a clipboard. "Sorry to interrupt," the assistant said nervously. "There's a collector asking about the crimson piece in the main hall, the one you showed earlier." Maya sighed lightly but smiled. "Duty calls for both of us, apparently." She turned back to Elias. "Will you still be here for a while?" "Probably another hour," he said. "Good," she replied. "I'd like to hear more about how surgeons see patterns. And I'd like to hear how artists create them," Elias said. Maya gave him one last curious look before following the assistant across the gallery. Elias remained by the smaller paintings for a moment, studying the thin lines on the canvas. Intervals. The breath between heartbeats. He realized something then that surprised him slightly. For the first time in months, perhaps longer, he was not thinking about the hospital schedule waiting for him tomorrow morning. Instead, he found himself wondering what Maya would say when she returned. The gallery slowly grew quieter as the evening progressed. Some collectors left after making their polite rounds, while others gathered near the bar to continue conversations about art, philanthropy, and investments. The soft jazz playing through hidden speakers blended with the distant murmur of the Charles River traffic outside. Elias remained near the small series Maya had shown him, studying the thin lines again. The longer he looked, the more he noticed subtle variations in color beneath the surface layers. Pale blues hidden under gray. Thin strokes of amber barely visible unless the light struck the canvas at a certain angle. It reminded him strangely of surgical imaging, the way deeper structures revealed themselves only when viewed from the right perspective. "You're doing it again." Elias turned slightly as Maya returned, setting her empty wine glass on a nearby table. "Diagnosing the painting?" he asked. "Dissecting it," she corrected gently. "Professional habit." She leaned beside him, looking at the canvas as well. "Did you find anything interesting?" "Yes," Elias said after a moment. "There are layers underneath. Colors you almost hide." Maya glanced at him with mild surprise. "Most people don't notice that." "Why hide them?" he asked. "I'm not hiding them," she replied. "I'm letting them exist quietly. Not everything has to dominate the surface." Elias nodded slowly. "That sounds like something a cardiologist once told me about heart rhythms. Sometimes the most important signals are the quiet ones." Maya smiled faintly. "You really do see the world in anatomy. And you see it in movement," he replied. They began walking slowly along the wall of smaller paintings, their conversation continuing naturally. Elias found himself relaxing in a way he rarely experienced at formal events. Maya asked questions about surgery that felt thoughtful rather than sensational. She didn't ask about dramatic life-saving moments. Instead, she asked about concentration, about the strange calm surgeons described during complex procedures. "It's like stepping outside of time," Elias explained. "When you're operating, everything else disappears. Hours pass, but it feels like minutes. That's exactly how painting feels, Maya said. When it's working, I stop noticing time entirely. They stopped before the final canvas in the row. This one was darker than the others. Thin silver lines crossed a field of deep indigo, forming something that resembled distant constellations. This one is called alignment, Maya said quietly. Elias studied it carefully. It looks calmer. It was the last one I painted in the series, she said. After the chaos settles. He nodded slowly. After the rhythm stabilizes. Maya turned toward him with a curious expression. You talk about surgery like it's music. In some ways it is, Elias said. Every movement has timing. Every step follows another. Do you ever get tired of it? She asked suddenly. The question caught him slightly off guard. Tired of saving lives? He said. No, Maya replied softly. Tired of carrying the responsibility. Elias didn't answer immediately. He looked again at the painting, at the quiet symmetry of the silver lines. Sometimes, he admitted. But if you stop caring about the responsibility, that's when you shouldn't be doing the job anymore. Maya watched him carefully, as if trying to understand something deeper in that answer. You're different from most of the doctors who come here, she said eventually. How so? They usually talk about achievements, awards, surgical statistics. And I don't. No, she said. You talk about patterns. Elias considered that for a moment, then shrugged lightly. Patterns are what keep people alive. For a brief second their eyes met again, and the same quiet sense of recognition from earlier returned. Across the gallery, the event coordinator began thanking guests as the evening neared its end. Staff members subtly started collecting empty glasses. Maya glanced toward the entrance. Looks like the night is ending. Elias checked his watch. Earlier than most hospital shifts. She laughed softly. Do you always compare life to hospital schedules? Occupational hazard. They began walking toward the front of the gallery together. Outside the glass doors, the city lights shimmered across the wet pavement. A light rain had begun to fall, turning the street into a mirror of reflected colors. At the entrance, they paused awkwardly for a moment, the way people sometimes do when a conversation they enjoyed is about to end. I'm glad you came tonight, Maya said finally. So am I, Elias replied. There was a brief pause before he spoke again. Would it be strange if I asked to see your studio sometime? Maya tilted her head slightly, considering the request. You mean a private tour? Professional curiosity, Elias said. Of course, she replied with a small smile. The doctor wants to examine the creative process. Exactly. She reached into her small bag and pulled out a card, writing something quickly on the back before handing it to him. My studio address, she said, and my number. Elias looked at the card briefly before slipping it carefully into his jacket pocket. I'll call, he said. I hope you do. For a moment, neither of them moved toward the door. The rain continued tapping softly against the glass outside, and the last guests filtered past them toward the street. Finally, Maya stepped back slightly. Good night, Dr. Elias. Good night, Maya. As Elias walked out into the cool Boston rain, he realized something unusual had happened during the evening. He had arrived expecting another predictable charity event, another polite social obligation attached to his profession. Instead, he left carrying a small white card in his pocket and the quiet feeling that the night had opened a door he hadn't known existed. 3 days passed before Elias finally called the number written on the small white card. Those days were consumed by the relentless rhythm of the hospital. 2 emergency bypass procedures, 1 valve reconstruction, and a 12-hour transplant preparation filled nearly every waking moment. Yet despite the exhaustion that usually followed such shifts, his mind returned more than once to the quiet gallery and the strange ease of his conversation with Maya. On the 4th evening, just after leaving the hospital parking structure, he took the card from his wallet and dialed the number before he could reconsider. Maya answered on the 3rd ring. Hello. It's Elias. There was a brief pause before her voice warmed slightly. Dr. Elias. I was hoping the studio invitation was still valid. It is, she replied. Are you free tonight? Elias looked up at the fading blue sky above the Boston skyline. For the first time this week. Then come by, she said. I'm working late anyway. Her studio was located in a converted warehouse district near the river. Old brick buildings lined the narrow streets, their windows glowing softly with scattered lights from workshops, design studios, and late-night cafes. When Elias stepped inside the building, he smelled oil paint and turpentine before he even reached the second floor. Maya's studio door stood half open. Inside, the space was larger than he expected. High ceilings crossed by old wooden beams, tall windows overlooking the dark river, and wide tables covered with brushes, pigments, and scattered sketches. Several canvases leaned against the walls in various stages of completion. Some were vibrant with color, others only faint outlines waiting to be filled. Maya stood near an easel with a brush in her hand, a streak of blue paint across the side of her wrist. She looked up when he entered. "You found it. Your directions were precise," Elias said. "Precision is important," she replied lightly. He stepped further inside, slowly taking in the room. The studio felt different from the polished gallery environment. It was raw, alive with the evidence of work in progress. Drops of paint marked the wooden floor. Sheets of rough sketches were pinned across one wall like fragments of a visual diary. "This is where the real work happens," Maya said, noticing his attention moving across the space. Elias stopped near a canvas resting against the wall. It showed only the early structure of lines, faint arcs spreading across the surface. "Planning stage?" he asked. "Something like that," she said. "It's the skeleton before the color arrives." Elias nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds familiar." "Of course it does," Maya smiled. "You operate on skeletons and vessels." "And you build them," he replied. She set her brush down and wiped her hands with a cloth. "Do you want coffee?" "If it exists." "It always exists in this room." While she moved toward a small corner kitchen, Elias continued walking slowly through the studio. He noticed how each painting seemed connected by an invisible thread. Movement, curves, rhythmic structures repeating in subtle variations. When Maya returned with 2 cups of coffee, she found him studying a large, unfinished canvas near the window. "That one isn't ready for viewers," she said. "I won't diagnose it yet," he replied. She handed him a cup and joined him near the painting. For a moment, they simply stood there, looking at the faint structure forming across the surface. "Do you ever think about how strange it is," Maya said quietly, "that our work deals with the same thing in different ways?" Elias glanced at her. "Life. Fragility," she corrected gently. "You repair it. I try to capture it before it disappears." Elias considered her words carefully. "In surgery," he said slowly, "you spend years training to prevent things from ending too soon." "And in art," Maya replied, "you accept that everything eventually does." A soft silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Outside the tall windows, the lights of Boston shimmered across the river like scattered stars. After a while, Maya leaned against the table behind her. "Tell me something honestly." "Dangerous request. Why did you really come tonight?" Elias didn't answer immediately. He looked around the studio again, at the unfinished canvases and the scattered sketches. "Because," he said finally, "the conversation we started in the gallery didn't feel finished." Maya studied his expression carefully. "That's a very careful answer," she said. "It's also the true one." A small smile appeared on her face. "Good," she said, "because I was hoping you'd come back." The rain that had started earlier returned softly outside, tapping against the tall warehouse windows. Inside the studio, the warm lights cast long, quiet shadows across the unfinished canvases. For the first time in weeks, Elias felt the relentless pressure of the hospital fade slightly from his shoulders. And without realizing it, the quiet connection that had begun inside a crowded gallery was slowly deepening into something neither of them yet fully understood. Over the next few weeks, Elias and Maya began seeing each other more deliberately. Their encounters were not grand gestures, but careful interweaving of schedules. Elias's hospital shifts were grueling, long nights, unpredictable emergencies, but somehow he always found a way to visit the studio, and Maya often stayed late to accommodate him. Each meeting felt like peeling back a layer, revealing aspects of each other that neither had shared with strangers, or sometimes with anyone at all. The hospital's pressure followed Elias even into the sanctuary of the studio. For days, he had felt a cold, professional distance from his mentor, Dr. Graves, but he hadn't expected it to breach his private life. However, as Elias stood by the window, he noticed a black sedan parked across the street, the same one Graves used. It was a silent, chilling reminder that in the small, elite circle of Boston's medical board, secrets were difficult to keep, and Graves' influence extended far beyond the operating room walls. Later that night, after coffee and conversation had drawn on longer than intended, they stepped out into the cool Boston air together. Rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under streetlights. Elias walked beside Maya, the distance between them comfortable, unforced. "You know," she said softly, "I don't usually invite strangers into my world this easily." "I'm not a stranger," he replied. She glanced at him. "You are now, in a way, but you're different. You notice things others don't. You see beyond the surface." "And you?" Elias asked, raising an eyebrow. "Do you often let strangers see your work in progress?" Maya shook her head. "Rarely, but I wanted you to see it. Not just the paintings, but the process." Elias smiled faintly, feeling an unfamiliar warmth in his chest. "Then I'm honored." For a long moment they walked silently. Then Maya paused, turning to face him. "There's something about your world I want to understand," she said. "Not just the surgery, but the weight you carry, the choices you make." "And there's something about yours I want to understand as well," Elias said. "The way you capture motion, light, and life on canvas. It's unexpectedly precise in its own way." Their eyes met again, and in the dim glow of the city lights, something shifted. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. A bond, fragile but real, was forming between them, built on understanding, shared recognition, and a quiet spark neither fully acknowledged aloud. Neither spoke further about what it meant. The streets glistened, the night was calm, and for the first time in a long while, both felt a sense of balance they had not anticipated finding outside the worlds they each commanded. Over the next several days, Elias's hospital shifts became increasingly punishing. Graves seemed to appear at every critical moment, assigning the most complex overnight procedures to him, scrutinizing his every decision during rounds, and subtly undermining his authority in front of colleagues. Each night, Elias returned home or to Maya's studio more exhausted than before, but the drive to protect his work, and increasingly, his connection with Maya, kept him moving forward. Maya noticed the change immediately. One evening, as she prepared a new canvas in her studio, Elias arrived later than usual, his tie loosened and his hands marked with faint traces of antiseptic. "You look worn down," she said softly. "It's a strategic pressure," Elias said, leaning back but remaining alert. "Graves is trying to disrupt my rhythm at the hospital. He's looking for a crack in the foundation." She set her brush down and approached, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "He's still part of your life?" Elias hesitated. "He's my mentor, technically, but lately it feels like something more. Like he's testing me, or worse, watching for a mistake." Maya's expression hardened slightly. "That's dangerous. You know how far he can go." "I do," Elias replied, "and I'm starting to see it firsthand. Subtle, indirect. He's challenging me in ways that could compromise my focus on patients and on us." Her eyes narrowed, concern evident. "He's targeting you because you're something he can't own," Maya said. "He views people, and art, as assets to be managed. You're becoming a star he can't control, and he hates that." Elias ran a hand through his hair, tension creeping into his posture. "I can't let him. Not now." Maya moved closer, her voice low. "Then we plan. We prepare. And we don't let him isolate you." The words felt like a pact. Elias met her gaze, the familiar intensity sparking between them. He had been drawn to her insight, her ability to see beneath surfaces, and now it became a shield against the growing storm. To Graves, medicine wasn't an art. It was a cold hierarchy where every gear had to stay in its assigned place. Elias, with his talk of rhythms and patterns, was a threat to that order. Watching from the shadows of his car, Graves didn't just see a rival. He saw a version of himself he had long ago traded for power. He hated Elias for still having the soul that he had lost somewhere between the boardroom and the operating theater. In the days that followed, Elias began documenting everything. Every directive Graves gave, every subtle interference, every irregularity in scheduling. A quiet investigation that consumed spare moments between surgeries. The hospital had procedures for internal complaints, for disputes over conduct, but Elias realized that direct confrontation would only alert Graves further. He needed evidence, and he needed patience. Meanwhile, his evenings with Maya became sanctuaries. The studio, with its scattered paints, canvases leaning against walls, and faint smell of turpentine, became a space where Elias could breathe. They spoke late into the night about color, composition, and the rhythm of painting. Each conversation a subtle reminder of trust, of perspective, and of life outside the relentless pull of the hospital. One night, after a particularly taxing day, Elias stayed longer than usual. Maya had begun working on a new piece, a sprawling canvas of deep scarlet and black, lines intersecting with chaotic elegance. Elias watched quietly. "You notice patterns?" she said without looking up. "I do," he replied. "And they tell a story before it's fully written." Maya paused, brush in midair, considering his words. "Then maybe you're the right person to see this one in progress," she said softly. As he leaned closer to the canvas, tracing the movement of her brush, Elias felt a strange calm settle over him. Despite Graves' growing interference, despite the exhaustion and the subtle threats, this connection with Maya remained a fixed point. The chaos of work, ambition, and authority could not reach the quiet rhythm they shared in this space. And yet, both of them knew, without saying it aloud, that the coming weeks would test more than their understanding of art and anatomy. They would test trust, loyalty, and the fragile pulse of a relationship already under unseen pressure. The escalation didn't happen in a meeting, but in the sterile silence of or for. Elias was mid-suture on a delicate bypass when Graves stepped into the room, not as an observer, but as a ghost. He didn't speak, but his presence was a cold weight in the room. He stood just close enough to be intrusive, watching every movement of Elias's hands with a surgical intensity that felt more like a threat than a mentorship. One slip, one tremor, and the story you're trying to write ends right here. Elias felt the sweat freeze on his brow, but his hands remained like stone. He didn't look up, refusing to give Graves the satisfaction of a flinch. After the procedure, Elias stepped out into the corridor, his mind already cataloging the irregularities he had observed. He acknowledged his colleagues' nods with a brief, disciplined professionalism, but his focus remained sharp. He didn't just feel Graves watching. He was already calculating his next move. Later, at Maya's studio, Elias recounted the evening in fragments. He didn't go into full detail. She didn't need all the specifics. She understood the gravity in his voice, the subtle undertone of danger. "You have to be careful," she said softly. "He's not just testing you. He's trying to control everything around you." "I know," Elias admitted, "but I can't let him intimidate me. Not here. Not with you." Maya reached across the table and placed her hand over his. The contact was brief, grounding. "Then we'll be cautious. And we'll watch each other's backs." The next day, Elias began gathering concrete evidence of Graves' interference. With the quiet help of a head nurse who had her own reasons to distrust Graves, he discreetly reviewed security footage from the operating rooms, noting every time Graves entered without legitimate procedural reason. He spoke quietly with a nurse who had observed Graves subtly altering patient charts. Elias leaned back, rubbing his eyes as the grainy security footage looped for the 10th time on his laptop in the studio. Maya stepped closer, her eyes narrowed as if she were critiquing a messy sketch. "Wait," she said, pointing to a corner of the screen. "Back it up 3 seconds. There's nothing there, Maya. He's in the blind spot." "Not quite," she murmured. "Look at the reflection in the glass cabinet across the hall. The angle of the light shifts. He's not just standing there. He's using the terminal, and he's using someone else's badge." Elias froze. What he had dismissed as a flicker of static, Maya saw as a deliberate break in the composition of the room. It was the interval she had painted, the split second that changed the entire meaning of the scene. Each piece of evidence was a step toward a larger strategy, a quiet countermeasure against a growing threat. Maya, meanwhile, focused on completing her new series. Her paintings became more intense, vibrant, almost urgent. Elias noticed the change immediately, lines sharper, colors deeper, the movement more pronounced. It mirrored the storm he was navigating at the hospital. Art and life converging in parallel intensity. One evening, as they reviewed her newest piece, Maya leaned back, exhausted but satisfied. "It feels like the canvas is breathing," she said. "Like a patient's heart," Elias replied. She glanced at him, a knowing look in her eyes. "You really do see everything through your work." "And you through yours," he said. "But it's helping me see more clearly about him, about us, about how far someone will go to control what they think belongs to them. Maya nodded. Then we'll be ready. Together. Outside the studio, the city lights reflected off wet streets, and the distant hum of Boston seemed to echo the rhythm of their combined resolve. Neither of them spoke of fear, only of focus. The coming days promised confrontation, subtle and potentially destructive, but in this quiet space, they found clarity and the strength to face it. The following week, the hospital administration announced a routine internal review of surgical protocols. Elias knew immediately that Graves would use the opportunity to escalate his subtle campaign. Every email, every procedural note, every minor discrepancy could be twisted against him. Yet Elias was prepared. He had compiled footage, nurse testimonies, and meticulous logs of Graves' interference. The air in the boardroom was thick with the smell of old paper and stale coffee. Graves sat at the far end of the table, his expression a mask of bored indifference. "The accusations are imaginative, Dr. Ward," Graves said, his voice smooth as silk. "But medicine relies on facts, not intuition." "I agree," Elias replied calmly. He tapped a key on his laptop, and the screen at the front of the room flickered to life. He didn't show the grainy hallway footage first. Instead, he showed the digital audit trail Maya had helped him decode. "This is the reflection in the glass cabinet at 2:14 a.m. And this," he pointed to a time-stamped log, "is where your personal override code was used on a terminal you supposedly weren't near." The mask didn't just slip, it shattered. For the first time in his career, Graves had no answer. The silence that followed was heavier than any surgical pause Elias had ever experienced. The ethics panel didn't just listen, they watched the static on the screen. Elias presented the surgical logs alongside the security footage he'd recovered. The moment the logs revealed Graves had accessed the patient's digital records late at night to alter medication dosages, effectively setting a trap for Elias to fail. A silence heavier than any operating room fell over the committee. Graves didn't flinch. He sat like a statue, his eyes fixed on the grain of the conference table. The evidence wasn't just precise. It was a career-ending revelation. The board's lead administrator looked from the screen to Graves, then to Elias, the power shift in the room as tangible as a physical weight. Security was called before Elias even stepped out of the room. Later, he called Maya. "It went as well as I could hope," he said. She laughed softly, relief evident in her voice. "I knew you'd handle it. But are you okay?" "I will be," Elias replied. "But now we have to anticipate his next moves." Maya's tone hardened slightly. "Then we continue as we have. Careful, deliberate, and together." That evening, Elias returned to her studio, seeking solace. The space felt like a refuge from the controlled chaos of the hospital. The latest canvases she was working on vibrated with color, each stroke echoing the urgency and precision of life-and-death decisions he navigated daily. "You're ready for the gallery opening next week?" Elias asked. "I am," Maya said. "And so are you, for everything you're about to face." They worked late into the night, their conversations flowing between color theory, surgical technique, and strategies for maintaining focus under pressure. In this shared rhythm, Elias realized that their connection had become more than admiration for each other's craft. It was a bond built on trust, mutual insight, and the understanding that the battles ahead would require both patience and courage. When the studio lights dimmed and the city outside slept, they stood side by side, observing the canvases. Each piece felt like a heartbeat, a measured pulse in the quiet night. Elias understood then that the coming confrontation with Graves, inevitable as it was, could not diminish the clarity and strength he had gained from these evenings. And for the first time in months, he allowed himself to believe that the storm could be faced and survived, without losing the fragile connection that had begun in a crowded gallery, now solidified in the shared sanctuary of art and trust.